Welcome, everybody, back to Draft Class Season 3. What a crazy thing to say. I'm Kris Persianen, excited, honored, ecstatic to be back with everyone here at the Knicks Film School family of podcasts. And I'm very lucky today to be joined by Coach Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops. You may know him from the Pistons Pulse. You may know him from Game Theory with Sam Vecenie. I know him as one of my draft gods out there and someone who sometimes will just like take how I think about something and flip it on its head. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So, Bryce, I appreciate you lots, and I appreciate you taking the time lots. Thanks so much for coming on.
What's up, Kris, man? No, thanks for having me. You sent me the DM and I'm like, yes. I started out doing Pistons stuff, and I've just recently, over the last year, 18 months, really got into the NBA draft. And let's be real. Anybody who knows me because of Game Theory and Sam Vecenie. Nobody's listened to the Pistons specific pod. But I always get excited now because I haven't done a lot of NBA draft guest spots so far. And so I get really excited when I get those requests. So thank you guys. I've been on, this network before with my guy, Andrew. That's my guy. I love him so much. And so I'm excited to be back.
Well, I'm glad I made you feel something positive, because ahead of this show, talking about a team where you don't really know, yes, they have draft picks this time, but will they use any of the ones they currently have? Probably not. Even if you think they're going to draft in the first round, maybe they'll just trade back one spot to mess with your mock. They're like the bracket buster of the NBA draft. Whatever you mocked out to happen is just not going to go down. But with that said, the New York Knickerbockers, man, they have the 24th, the 25th, and the 38th pick in this upcoming draft. And that is certainly a fascinating triumvirate of selections for Brock Aller, for Walt Perrin. Walt Perrin, the late first round god, from Rudy Gobert at 27 to Emmanuel Quickley at 25, Quentin Grimes at 25. This is the sweet spot, right? But I want to start a little more macro and talk about what the end of this first round or this class in general looks like. Because I promise I'm not being a contrarian without a cause, but I don't dislike this draft class the way that other people do.
That's because you don't have the number 1 pick or the number 3 pick. And that's what, at the end of the day, that's what this draft is. It's very flat at the top. And that's different than most classes, right? And here's the problem. We're coming off the Victor Wembanyama draft that also had Scoot Henderson, which no matter what happened in his rookie season, as a prospect, people were very excited about Scoot Henderson for multiple years. And then Brandon Miller, people are excited about him. Even the Twins generated buzz. There was just all of these names. And this class just doesn't have those dudes. So it's very flat at the top. There's not the superstar that we can see right now. Maybe one of these guys turns into it. I was just talking to somebody earlier about how I think this draft gets really exciting, has really good value, late lottery, mid first round. And then you still have some of the same types of players at the end of the first round. I'm not saying I like all of these guys, but there are some names that make sense. And I think there's some names that make sense for the Knicks.
Yeah, 100%. There are, guys that I've taken, the Mavs draft community mocks. Shout out Mavs draft for those.
My guy, Richard. Yeah.
Yep. There are times where I'll get Yves Missy at 24 for New York. And then there are times he's gone at 14. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's just, this is the kind of class where your big board from 15 to 35 could be someone else's from 35 to 15. And you could both really confidently, strongly, intelligently defend those cases. So it's fascinating to me.
So I was literally just talking to @Mavs Draft, Richard Saman, earlier today. We got on the phone. We were talking about some stuff, and we talked about how, and this is what hopefully I can provide your show today, is I'm about scouting these kids. At the end of the day, I want to provide who are they, what can they bring? And then I want your listeners to decide, does that sound like a Tibbs guy? Does it not sound like a Tibbs guy? Is that someone the Knicks should draft at 24? I have a big board. I do mock drafts, but really my passion is just scouting them and then providing that information to people. Hey, you don't have time to watch all these. I'll do it. Here's what this kid does well. Here's what he doesn't. And then use your perspective on the value. But yeah, so just real quick, my tier 2 is 10 to 18. My next tier, my end of the first round, top of the second, is from number 19 to, you just said it, number 35. And so there's just, there's a lot of guys, and there's a little bit of overlap with that. So I'm still very excited. It's just that you don't have the guys at the very top. If you added a couple superstars at the top, people would not talk about this draft the way they are.
No, and I remember the last draft class that people talked about as being dismal and abysmal ended up producing quickly at 25. Jaden McDaniels, like guys like Bane at 30. Like that class is not star-studded, like sixth man studded, like or starter studded. People were like horrified of it, and they were trying to talk about how like mortifying it was for the NBA to have this be like their big upcoming draft class. And little do you know, the guys who went outside of the top 10, the list is like hilarious, like Halliburton, Vassell, Quickly, McDaniels, Bane. I'm trying to think of others off the top of my head. I can't, because there's so many.
You still haven't named a single Detroit Piston, and they had 3 picks in that class.
Maxey.
Hence why Troy Weaver just got fired.
Yep. There you go. Well, you take enough rangy athletic wings and you end up with some pretty good range of outcomes, no pun intended, but it is what it is. The Pistons should be excited. And I think it's always hard to sell fans on hopium when there's no precedence, but there's something there, right? Like Sasser, Cade also are like, it's
yeah. No, there is something there. I continue to tell Pistons fans this. There's something there. There is a path. It's just way more narrow than it should be for a team that's been rebuilding for 3 years and hasn't won games. And you would assume is stockpiling draft picks, which they haven't, because the Knicks own one of their picks eventually, whenever it actually does convey. But there is a path. Trajan Langdon will have to narrowly find it, but there is a path to greener pastures. And for the record, I love this Knicks team this year. They were so much fun to watch. I was so sad as the injuries just continued to decimate them. I had a blast watching this team play. I've always kind of liked Dante DiVincenzo. Man, whenever he was asked to do it, he really stepped up. Hartenstein has always been a player I really liked. And then of course Brunson, like I don't mean to leave him out, this stud, but I really enjoyed watching this Knicks team.
I feel like there are maybe 6 guys on this Knicks team who raised their like top 100 ranking, whether it was like not being on the list to now being in like the top half of it or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, like, or the more impressive is wherever Brunson was coming into the year to a top 10 player. 10. Like sometimes that's a harder jump to make than Deuce going from what he was to a real rotation player, or Hartenstein to one of the biggest names that we realistically think would be on the market this summer. Like that's just all impressive. Brunson taking the leap he did that's tough, man. That's really tough. So yeah, we could have a whole podcast about who earned themselves the most money on the New York Knicks roster this season with their play.
And it's funny you say that, because I was just about to reference Tom Thibodeau's kind of not philosophy as a coach, but just one of his mantras, I guess, one of his many. And it's that if you go out and focus on individual success, you can get yourself paid. If you go out and hog the ball, or you go out and just gamble for steals and get some great highlights, like you can get yourself paid. If everyone buys in, if everyone unites under a single common cause, everyone will get paid. Including him, including Tibbs. And so that's the thing that worked in Chicago. That's what didn't end up working in Minnesota. And that's what's been working in New York. Like the Tibbs success versus failure, like outcome tree is pretty much really heavily influenced by, can he unite them under a common cause, which is like the job of a coach, right? But it almost also gives so much credit to the defense and everything, like the attention to detail, the Belichickian attention to detail being a given with him. And I think that's a great segue into talking about guys like Deuce McBride, like the picks they've made that just fit. And Thibodeau was really instrumental in them picking McBride. Like he loved him. He loved Grimes. And then looking at this class and maybe who would fit that mold, who would be the best, mix of on-court fit and Thibodeau fit out there. I'm sure you have names that are coming to the top of your mind, especially in that late first round range.
Yeah, there is. And that's what, I told you this is what interesting with the Knicks. And that's why I was excited to do this is I have guys who I think make sense. And listen, I watch the general NBA, right? I watched a bunch of Knicks, but I'm not a Knicks, if you ask me about the Pistons, I feel like I'm an expert on the Pistons. I've watched every second for 4 years. I haven't done that for the Knicks. So what I'm excited here is I'm going to throw out Tyler Kolek, Zach Edey, some of those guys. And I'm interested to see if you go, oh yeah, that's definitely a Tibbs guy. Or if you're like, no, I don't know, not so much. Or guys like Ryan Dunn, who fits the mold on the defensive end, but does he fit the mold on the offensive end? Or Tyler Smith, who I think fits the mold offensively, but doesn't fit the mold defensively. And so those are the ones I'm interested. But yeah, I think Kolek is one that's we over at Game Theory mock to the Knicks a lot. And Zach Edey is another one. Now, that doesn't make as much sense depending on what happens with Hartenstein and the big guys and all of that. But those are the two names that I feel like, with those back-to-back picks, we've done Kolek and Edey quite a bit. So I guess my question to you is, are those guys that feel like, Tibbs, Knicks types of players?
Kolek, 100%. He's someone who I always somehow wind up with in those Mavs draft community mocks. He's someone who I think the Knicks would absolutely take. Like we have McDonald's at home meme is like just after losing to the Pacers in the playoffs, like we have TJ McConnell at home, like that's the Kolek comp to me in terms of why Tibbs would like him.
Less so like can shoot, but
can shoot. Not exact play style, more like this is a mother. This guy is just tough as nails. All the cliches, all the lunch pail, whatever cliches too. Kolek to me, particularly, and it's funny you said Kolek and Edey because I always think Kolek and Missy, but it's like Kolek in a center is I put out a Knicks offseason prediction like the day the season ended, like the day of Game 7. And I was like, Mitch, Deuce, the 24th pick, the 38th pick, and a future first for McCall, and then draft Eve Missy and Kolek. We'll see. They also have Rokas Jokubaitis, right? So like if they plan to bring him over, especially because he seems to be falling a bit out of favor over in Europe. If they bring him over, then Kolek doesn't become so integral of a need. But like, I just think he fits so well, especially if you're trading McBride. Not that like they should be planning to, but if it comes to that. And then the center part, like Edey.
Okay, so this
I'm high on him.
These are very different bigs, right? Like Edey is the monster big who's going to set crazy physical screens, be a ball screen, but play finisher. I don't know that the post game translates to the NBA. Offensive rebound, true drop coverage big, defender, all of those things. Where Misi is like this twitchy, explosive, lob threats, a little bit skinny right now. And then defensively, really blocking shots, running around, high energy type of player. I guess I felt like Edey being a little bit more solid, a little bit older and less raw would make more sense with Tibbs. But you kind of seem to be leaning towards Misi, which is interesting to me because, Misi hasn't been playing the game quite as long. I think he's going to take a little bit longer to get there. So I find that interesting.
So the thing with Misi that's tough is and I know the thought is like, oh, you draft him if you're losing one of the two centers. I almost think they would want to take him and send him to Westchester for a year.
Sure, absolutely.
Thibodeau, I remember talking with Mark Berman, infamously New York Knicks beat Emeritus pretty much. I was like, okay, number 11 pick, Knicks are on the clock. Johnny Davis and Tari Eason are both there. Who do they take? And he was like 100% Johnny Davis because Thibodeau wants nothing to do with the project like Tari Eason. I was like, okay. So that was back when the team wasn't so good. So now I think there's zero patience for a project. Tibbs wanted to send Emmanuel quickly to Westchester for his full rookie season. He did not want him in the rotation. That's why they had Austin Rivers and that extra guard that ended up, being Rivers getting traded halfway through the year. Like, Tibbs does not, there's no interest in a project. There's no interest in like development on the court. If they lose one of the two centers, whether it's they re-sign Hartenstein but trade Robinson, or Hartenstein gets wooed elsewhere by the paycheck and Robinson's all they've got left, like I can see them bringing back Achua just to not play whatever rookie center they bring in. That said, Edey, to me, if there was like a prop bet with like really nice odds of like first person in this class to average 20 points a game in a season, I might go with him because he's so ready. Like he's so ready to fill that. I don't know. Maybe this is weird, like small tangent, but like, do you see him as like a sixth man almost to start his career? Like the lead scorer of a bench unit just from the center spot?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's exciting about Edey off the bench is I think if he's playing in a second unit, depending on who else is around him, I think you do maybe go to that post game a little bit more. And so I think in a starting unit with stars, he's a screen setter, and you just use his massive, frame to set screens on ball, even off ball, and then tell him to go offensive rebound. Or if they get a switch and a mismatch, then he catches in the post and finishes. I think in a second unit, maybe you run some of the offense through him like we saw at Purdue, not to that extent, but you do run some sets just to let him catch and finish. I think that's one of the biggest things for him is how much does that post game translate? Because he is going to play against more massive defenders. The shot clock is much quicker. And so there's not as much time to get into these long drawn out post up possessions. And so I've kind of evaluated him more as a second unit big, set screens, rim runs, offensive boards, plays drop coverage, and is just massive on that end.
Yeah, right. And like he's never going to start on a team coached by Tom Thibodeau unless Achua, Robinson, and Hartenstein all, I don't know, like catch the same case of COVID in the same week. Like I don't know. There's no scenario, right? And so that's why, to me, it's hard to guess what's going to happen in free agency. But assuming they retain Hartenstein, he told Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype that so long as the Knicks match the dollar amount, he'll be back there. So there's a clear intention to want to stay in New York. I think he really does credit Thibodeau with his rise to, like, his recognitional rise to where it is. Like, I remember liking Hartenstein when he was a Rio Grande Valley Viper, and the finals MVP, right? But that was a long time ago. There were stops in Cleveland and Houston, and then the real stop in Los Angeles that catapulted him to relevancy. Now he's like a known starter, and that's crazy. So that's an amazing career arc for him, an amazing story. I think he does feel like partial to New York. I think he does feel like that pull of loyalty. Say they retain him and say Robinson's on the roster, I would think that if they're drafting in the first round and Misi's there and Kolek's also there, they would just go Kolek and let the center, like, the Knicks are super, super simple with their centers. Unless it's going to be Jokic or Embiid or, Hakeem or like any like super otherworldly kind of center talent, they don't care. They just want someone who can rebound and defend and play drop and switch a little. And they like, here's a great example for you. Jeremy Cohen of KFS and I knew about this like 20-page essay that some guy posted about how stretch bigs aren't real. Like, there are very few real stretch bigs in the NBA, like true stretch fives.
Sure.
And he mentioned Porzingis as one of like the real ones. And he mentioned Miles Turner as only drawing closeouts on 33% of his attempts from downtown. And that essay disappeared off the face of the internet like a couple weeks after it went up. And Jeremy tracked the guy down. New York Knicks data analyst. Like, they hired him and made him delete it. And like that to me is like so loudly their philosophy when it comes to the center position. That's why Hartenstein having the significance he does with the team is almost like a little surprising because of that offensive versatility. But then again, look at his first year with the team. Look at his assist rate month by month. It started out at like 5%. Like it was like ended up at like 14. So that, over time, Thibodeau's learned how to use him. But for me, it's tough with Edey versus Misi. I think it kind of depends on what happens with the centers.
So Misi there kind of fits into what you're talking about, though. Like he's young, he's raw, but again, if you just want him to catch lobs, pick and roll, offensive rebound defensively, play and drop, that's probably what he could be able to do. I don't think he's as good as Derek Lively at all. And Derek Lively's passing is something that's I think we're seeing now throughout the playoffs. And I don't think Misi's able to do that. But just in terms of the lob threat and the defensive, rim protector, I think he could do that for 10 or 15 minutes a night, maybe 20 on a given night if you wanted to for the Knicks. And so maybe that's where he does make more sense. If that's like, we're going to keep it basic. We're going to let him be super twitchy, super explosive, finish above the rim, rebound, play drop. And like you said, every once in a while, I think he's athletic enough to get up and guard a little bit differently.
He has the athleticism that almost like enables poor behavior in the sense where it's like,
sure,
he can make those ludicrous gambles, like playing drop coverage, except at the top of the key and then just run back in time to block the shot. It reminds me a little bit of a young Mitchell Robinson who then after bulking up to real like banging and bruising NBA center weight, didn't have that athleticism to make those huge gambles. Mitchell Robinson used to block like 9 shots in a game and 4 of them would be 3-pointers because he was hilarious, man. He was just everywhere. Now he won't do that. But what he does do is lock down 2 to 3 passing lanes at a time from the paint. Yeah. And that is more valuable to the Thibodeau scheme than the flashy blocks and the guy who can be all over the court. So Misi, I think, is someone who they would also want to bulk up and essentially, as a result, lose that functional athleticism in regards to being all over the court. But then, yes, have the ability to be the lockdown anchor of the defense. And speaking of defense, go ahead.
I just wanted to read real quick some of my defensive notes for your list. So I put drop coverage big that can really move, has the ability to backpedal and drop, and then elevate and contest a lob pass. Has to learn to contest with his left hand. He can move. So all the stuff we're talking about here, super active defensively. So good length, but stays engaged, utilizes that length. And I think something here that you'll really like, I make notes of this because there's bigs that don't box out. Like they just try to be bigger than people. Misi boxes out. Like I have it here in my notes. Seems like a small thing, but evaluate a lot of bigs who rely solely on their physical tools and never really make their box outs. Misi was a guy that I put in my notes as I evaluated him, was a guy that would go get checkouts on the defensive end. So like I say, while we talk about him being raw, I think there's some of that defensively, a lot of it's offensively, but some of those things that I just read right there fit right into what you say a Tibbs big is looking for.
And it's funny because Othello Harrington is like the centers coach for the Knicks, and his impact was super apparent. Like, yeah, Kenny Payne is the big man whisperer, and he was with New York before his now infamous Louisville tenure. But Othello Harrington came on the staff, and from game 1 of his first season, you were watching these Knicks bigs box out like never before. And it was just like the fundies, right? Like they had it all down, sealing the paint. Mitchell Robinson, like in his 3rd year is when he sealed the paint for the first time. Swear to God, 3rd year is when he sealed the paint for the first time. Doesn't miss an opportunity now. And he boxes out and it's crazy. So even like you see Harrington working with Robinson before like playoff games, they're just sitting watching tape and they're not just standing around working on fundamentals because they have that all down. Like Hartenstein works with another one of the assistant coaches and they just work on his floater touch before games because the boxing out, the fundamentals, like that's all just tattooed on their brain. Like it's so ingrained. So Misi, like, is he raw? Yes. But I don't know. Like if you trust your coaching staff, if you like,
that's a big part of it.
You pay them a lot of money. So yeah, I wanted to move to a different part of the court, and a name that you mentioned, GMAC, Andrew Claudio, was saying earlier how like he'll have me pick a player for the thumbnail. And my guess of a player that you'd want to spend a lot of time talking about for these New York Knicks was Ryan Dunn.
You sure?
So you brought him up already. I'm going to give you the red carpet here to just wax poetic on why the offense might not be a fit and why Tom Thibodeau probably does not care at all that the offense isn't a fit because of what that kid is like on the other side of the basketball.
Yeah, so I'll give my quick scout here. Offers position-less defensive versatility. That's a big-time playmaker, both with steals and blocks, but is also what I call solid, both on and off the ball. So there's defenders who I think are disruptive and playmakers, and then there's defenders who are like really solid. They stay in front of the ball. They make the rotations. I think Ryan Dunn does both. Has physical tools, length, athleticism to go with the motor and instincts to be an impact on that end of the floor at all times. Any team could use this type of defender. But there are major questions around the shooting, low 3-point volume, and percentage, along with a career 53% free throw shooter. Hasn't shown the off the dribble stuff, the passing upside, any of that stuff. I mean, I think what you're looking at offensively is just like, hopefully he can have timely cuts, offensive rebound, catch lobs, transition, those type of things. I don't know how that works in the Knicks offense. You know, like, does he play well off Jalen Brunson ISOs? I'm not sure I believe that. You know, does he play well off non-floor spacing bigs? You know, like if they're occupying the dunker spot, he can't occupy the dunker spot. But man, this dude defensively is a ton of fun. And in my notes, one thing I put is say, just watch a game. Done this, Dunn did that. Dunn had his imprint all over that possession. It is truly impactful defense in every sense of the phrase.
Yeah. So for me, like, the offensive part of this makes me think regular season depth. Like, once it gets time for the 82 playoffs,
82 game players is what I refer to those guys as.
Yeah. And that's good. Like, you need them. And that maybe that's what this draft is all about, right? Is like filling the holes in your roster with cost controlled assets that are not going to just like play themselves off the court in the sense where like they're bringing a sharpened skill to the table. The other part of it though is that the Knicks specifically have Josh Hart out there so much, and they have a team with guys who are not necessarily all knockdown shooters. Like Julius Randle has transformed his game, is one of my favorite players to watch in the NBA because I love big guys who can make plays, who can pass, who can score. It's just so much fun to watch those guys go to work. And Randall can do the ISO barrage. He'll demolish your best. Like, I remember there was a game against Toronto where he gave OG work, he gave Pascal work, and he gave Scotty work. Like, it was like, who's next? Who's next? Who's next? But with all that said, he's not Peja Stojakovic. He's right. Yeah. So like, would Dunn kind of be in a situation where his flaws are being exacerbated? Maybe. Then again, you watch the New York Knicks in the playoffs this season. You watch them starting third stringers, guys who started the season as third stringers in Deuce McBride. You watch them getting 5 straight good games out of Alec Burks. But to me, what stood out the most, if you were a non-Knick fan watching these Knicks in the playoffs, or a non-Knick reporter, or a non-Eastern Conference specialist, whatever it is, like the defensive rotations necessary to run the Thibodeau scheme to perfection, which they mostly did, are literally like hacking 2K and trying to make scoring impossible, like turning the sliders all the way up on the opponent's defensive basketball IQ, like everything. All the execution has to be and was flawless, and that to me is where Dunn fits in more because of the solid side to him that you were mentioning than anything else.
So I think this is part of a bigger conversation that I'm trying to have and evaluate and consider is I think 82 game players provide values, even to teams that want to make deep playoff runs. What was the Knicks' biggest issue with their playoff run? It wasn't that they weren't ready. It's that they weren't healthy. Now, maybe Tibbs won't extend his rotation in the regular season, and so it's a moot point. But I think some 82 game players, I talked about this with the Nuggets, the Warriors, like they need guys that can play in the regular season to eat up minutes, you know, kind of like pitchers in baseball, right? Like
innings eat. I knew exactly where the Freudian slip came.
I got sped up there. I'm getting old, guys. So I think these guys can provide value. And so what if Ryan Dunn, you have to take him out of the rotation? We're talking about pick 24 or 25 here, Kris. I don't think that that's the worst value at that spot. And then here's the other thing. What if he learns to shoot? Like people are talking about like Donovan Clingan becoming Brooke Lopez or whatever, where there's no real data points to show that. Why can't we talk about it with Ryan Dunn then? Like, why can't the Knicks or whoever develop it? And if he shoots threes, even just from the corner, Kris, if he shoots 38% on volume from the corner threes, now you're talking about an insane two-way 3-and-D value. So I think at this point, a starter. So I think at this point in the draft, the floor is 82 game difference maker on the defensive end. And the upside is a two-way starter that fits right into what every team needs with a corner, knockdown shooter, and defender. Now, do I think he's going to shoot? I don't. But still, the defense is insane.
It's so good. And that to me is where, like, you know, obviously, not to sound like a coach here, but like when the playoffs come around or when an important game, like to Tibbs, right? Like game 39 is the end of game 39 is basically the playoffs in terms of how he goes about it. Like he doesn't care where you were drafted. He doesn't care what people thought about your draft class. He doesn't care about any of that. He just wants guys who can do the things he needs them to do. And that to me is where someone like Dunn would fit right in. Like we know Thibodeau has been someone who will go ahead and play Daquan Jeffries 2 seconds at the end of the half for a defensive possession or at the end of a game for a defensive possession because he's long. Like, well, Ryan Dunn would be an actual weapon in that regard. But I also think if someone gets hurt, he can play and fit kind of naturally into the offense. The best example is like OG Anunoby's first game as a Knick. He barely knew the playbook. He was, you know, coming from a different country, playing basketball in Canada, now the US. Like he's in a hotel. Obviously, he knows the US well, college in Indiana and all that. But lots of adjustments going on. And he just figured it out. Like he sat in the corner and he shot when he was open. And when there was room to cut, he did. He had several dunks. He had several threes in his first regular season game as a Knick against the Timberwolves. So this was not like target practice, right? Like it was a great defense. And that to me, like Dunn, I would bet on Dunn to just figure it out, especially with what he's shown on defense, like reverse engineering that into offensive creativity in regards to like split second decision making and I need to cut now, or sure, you know, like
Here's the other thing we haven't talked about. He also played at Virginia. And listen, my former assistant coach is the associate head coach at Virginia. So I mean, great dude, obviously somebody I really care about and was a major impact on my life. And Virginia's had great success. But we all know the Virginia offense is slow and methodical. And, you know, there's a mover blocker and screen and then move it and then other side. Like my point being, maybe there's some untapped stuff within his offensive game that we didn't get a chance to see because he played in that offense at Virginia. I'm not saying he was this knockdown shooter and didn't get a chance to show it. I'm just saying maybe there's more cutting, more offensive rebounding. Maybe there is some short roll passing or something like that that we didn't see because of the context of the offense at UVA.
That's super fair. Like, I don't know. I think of like Trey Murphy and guys like that who come in the NBA and now have lots of Pelicans fans are like, oh, he's going to get 25 million a year at least. Like, look what Cam Johnson got, look, deals like that. And it's like, well, watching him at Virginia, I don't think that would have been my first thought ever. Like, I liked Trey Murphy. I definitely was high on him, I thought. And now it's like, oh, I should have probably been higher on him. So, guys like this surprise all the time. And to me, the guys you make that bet on are the ones who show at this age, pretty much my age, that they are NBA ready defenders. Like, that's crazy. So, yeah.
No, it will be really interesting to track. Like every year there's guys I'm like, I'm going to learn something from evaluating this player. And Ryan Dunn's going to be one of those. Like, Ryan Dunn is a player I feel like I'm going to learn about in terms of how does the NBA truly value a defender who may have questionable offense? And then how does Ryan Dunn develop whenever he does get into the NBA? So I think he's an awesome test case in regards to that, at least for me. This being the first year where I've really dove in and have a 150 plus player big board and all my scout notes and all of that. He's a player I'm really interested to see how NBA teams value on draft night.
Now, I want to ask you, given the Knicks history, right? Given the fact that they love to kick the can down the road and then also trade back, and also, they'll never just take a guy at their pick. Like, they're almost like addicted to gaming the system and getting extra picks out of it. I'll never forget like this new front office in 2020, their first like off-season moves were taking Ed Davis into cap space and getting 2 second-round picks for it, and then trading Ed Davis for 2 second-round picks. And like, then you're like, okay, well, what are they going to do with 4 second-round picks? Well, it was Burks and Walker and Noel's contracts attached with 6 second-round picks that freed up the room for Jalen Brunson. So like, it all connects, right? And I don't know what it is that they're going to do in this draft class, but speaking of connects, I definitely don't think they're going to move up into even like that kind of range for Dalton. Sure. That's like, I don't see them moving up. They never move up. It's like never worth it. And the only guy they've ever come really close to moving up for was Jaden Ivey. But when Sacramento and when Detroit wanted bigger packages than they were willing to offer, they just said no. Yeah. And so that's kind of who they are. Like, they have their line in the sand in their head and they just will not cross it. With all this contextual setup, I want to ask you, what about this draft class makes you feel like it's a good or not good bet to trade down a couple spots, whether it's trading 24 in some kind of deal, keeping 25, moving down to 31, punting 38 down the road, then just taking a guy at 31? Like, this is the class to do that, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know, every year where these tier breaks happen, but I'm a very big tier person. So as I mentioned earlier, right now, my third tier there, which the Knicks have 2 picks in and almost that third, even with the second round pick at 38, goes from 19 to 35. So by that, depending on who they like and who they don't, they could trade back to 31 and, like you said, get value. Now, I think one thing that always has to be equated with that is the contracts, right? You don't have a first round deal whenever you take someone at 31. Now you're taking a second round. And I know the second round exception, all of that, you have ways to get guys on longer deals than there was at one time, but it's still different in terms of that. So maybe they would want the first round pick with the way the contract works, or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would want more flexibility, lower cap numbers, those type of things. But just in terms of players, like, I'll just name you my guys in that. Like, I'm a little lower on Johnny Furphy. I have Johnny Furphy, Baylor Shireman. So Ryan Dunn is number 27 on my board. So I'll name you the guys directly after that in this tier: Baylor Shireman, Johnny Furphy, Khalil Ware, Bobby Klintman, Justin Edwards, Pakum Dadier, AJ Johnson, and Oso Iguodaro. I mean, so I don't know if any of those names strike you as interesting or not, but I would guess. Okay. So that's the thing though, like, to your point, some of those guys, multiple of those guys are going to be there at 31 because that goes to 35 on my board. And I'm sure there's guys below this that I don't have that are going to go before. So you're looking at 7, 8 guys probably that could be there at 31 that could be intriguing to you.
I think if Iguodaro's there at 38, that might be someone they might want to send to Westchester just because he brings a different look to the center position than they have, right? Like, and that's, first of all, do you see him as a 5?
I think he has to probably.
Yeah.
Because like, I guess it depends on who your other big is, but like Oso, when we say can't shoot, Oso is the dictionary version of can't shoot. Oso does not make shots past 15 feet. Has a beautiful floater.
I was going to say the push shot and the floater are ridiculous.
I mean, he might as well shoot it from the free throw line. He might as well shoot the push floater from the free throw line as opposed to a jump shot. And he can really pass. I think he's one of the best big man passers in the class. He has real explosion. I don't think people talk enough about his explosion. So he's a real ball screen threat, just not to pop. Defensively, some versatility, some rim protection, especially with verticality. He doesn't rebound very well. Like that would be my biggest worry with him in New York is he's not coming in to dominate the boards, especially on the defensive end. I think offensively, he would be okay. He'd fit in there. Defensively, he doesn't rebound extremely well. Maybe that's something that can be coached up, add some more size, those type of things. But Oso's interesting. And listen, I've talked to people who have Oso way lower than me, like way lower. So I think 38's a real spot that he could be available.
For sure. And I think if the Knicks took him and they would send him to Westchester, I would bet it would be as like the long-term Precious Achiuwa replacement in regards to like, here's a third string center who can bring a totally different kind of pitch to our rotation. You know, they've got like Mitchell Robinson was the fastball for years. Now it's like Hartenstein, because of Brunson, kind of made himself the starter. He's such a good release valve in pick and roll. And he's such a good option out there when you have an Anunoby and a Hart and a Brunson out there to have Hartenstein able to make those push shots, those floaters, like it all clicks together. So Iguodaro obviously doesn't have the rim protection of a Hartenstein, the rebounding of a Hartenstein.
Correct.
But it's also not like Hartenstein is some top percentile rebounder himself. Like he's more valuable because of everything he brings to the table, not in a Mitchell Robinson way where it's like he's a lead at 3 things and that keeps him on the floor for extended playoff minutes in which he does a great job guarding someone like Joel Embiid. So, you know, it's tough with the Knicks because it used to be almost easy to think about like what kind of guys in the draft class would fit the roles that they deem acceptable for certain positions. But now you've seen Tom Thibodeau be really forced to experiment. Like Jalen Brunson and Deuce McBride in the back. Emmanuel Quickley was too small to him to play next to Jalen Brunson in the backcourt. And then he got traded and 7 guys got injured. And he was like, okay, I guess I have to play Jalen and Deuce.
With Dante on the court also, like all 3 of those guys together.
Fast forward a couple months later, and he's like, it's the NBA playoffs. I need to lean on the Jalen Deuce backcourt. So like he's been forced into a lot of things, right? We got minutes in the Philadelphia series before Bogdanovich went down, where Anunoby was the 5 on the floor. Hello. Like that's not Tom Thibodeau at all, except now it is. And so with all that said, it's become much harder to predict who fits the Knicks mold. With that acknowledged, with it put out there on the table that the Knicks are willing to bend their Thibodeauian perceptions of who can play what positions. Is there anyone that stands out in this draft class as like adding another pitch to their rotation, bringing a different kind of look to a certain position?
Let me ask you this. What do you think this team needs? Like what is the position that's lacking? Let's say Hartenstein stays, Mitch Rob stays. You have Brunson, Dante, OG, Randall, one of those 2 centers starting, the other backing up, which means Hart's off the bench, Deuce off the bench, whatever happens. What do you think? What is the need? And then I think I can give you a name of either a changeup, a curveball, or just to help with depth.
So like the fastball need would be Kolek, right? Like backup playmaking guard who's a shot maker, but
operate ball screens,
gets the team into their sets.
Yes, agreed. What's the change up? Like a transition athletic wing that can shoot? Is that interesting?
Like Burke switched to clutch, right? Like the real Hooper mold. So the Jordan Clarksons, Alec Burkses of the world.
Okay, so I'll throw out a name. Bub Carrington is a guy that's getting a lot of interest right now. I think Bub would be interesting in the sense of, one, Bub is from Pittsburgh, and I've heard like he is a tough kid, super competitive. You score on me, I'm going to go at you. He's longer, lankier. I think his best skill right now is his scoring off the dribble. So maybe this is like the offensive usage guy when Brunson isn't in the game. You go to Bub and let him, kind of operate and go get some buckets. I think he can pass as well. And then one thing that really sold me on him later in the year was his point of attack defense. He has good length, and I watched him really get into Hunter Salas, who ended up going back to school, but I had as a late first, early second round pick who had a great year at Wake Forest. So if that's what you're looking for, Bub Carrington would be kind of interesting then.
So I saw Bub play live at Syracuse, and I was up there with to see my girlfriend, and as soon as we sat down for the game to start, the Anunoby trade broke. So it was definitely my full attention was not on the game, but he really impressed me. Yes, Pitt blew a double-digit lead. Copeland and Mintz were incredible. They were really, really fun. But Carrington had 17 points on 6 for 12. He had 7 and 5 assists. Like, he was really good. And he's someone who I thought might even stay, like, to try and come into the draft like as super polished as possible. But I love that he's in the draft. I don't even know how much of a question it was for him. It shouldn't have been one realistically. I really like him a lot. And I think that's an amazing answer because I would love his fit on the Knicks as that change up, as someone who, yes, they send to Westchester for a full season to start out, but ends up becoming someone that like forces Tom Thibodeau to bend his perception of the guys he wants on the court. And that's like, Emmanuel Quickley will always be like my favorite example of that. Like, Thibodeau saw how Quickley performed from the 4-point line in the practice facility and was like, okay, I guess I have to let this guy pull from 30. And that's because ultimately he just wants to win. Like, Tibbs just wants to win. And so if letting Quickley pull from 30 does him better than forcing Quickley to get 2 feet in the paint and finish through bigger defenders, which is what he wants out of every guard he's ever coached in his life ever. That's how Elfrid Payton started 82 games for this team in the year of our Lord 2021. I think that it would be someone like Carrington, who's just like, Tibbs watches him and he's just like, God damn it. Like, this kid is so good. Like I love it. I love that pick. My final question for you, Bryce, I'm going to give you a gambling chip of worth 100 Kris bucks. So, okay. Some maybe like the conversion rate is like a drink if you're in New York. But if you had to bet on one guy who, when ESPN sends out NBA draft results 1 through 60, has New York Knicks next to his name, and not because they traded the pick and someone else took him. If you had to bet on one player to end up in orange and blue at Media Day next year, who would it be from this draft class?
Do I have to put all 100 on one player, or can I divide
player?
This? I mean,
one guy.
Listen, I'm not hot takey. I'm not exciting. I'm not fun. Like, I'm just old.
That's the Knicks.
And so I'm just going to say Tyler Kolek. Like, it just makes too much sense. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Devin Carter to the Heat. Everybody loves mocking that one. At one point, it was Donovan Clingan to the Grizzlies. Now, both of those guys actually have that's a different conversation. Both of those guys may have
played that slot.
Yeah, outplayed those slots. I don't think Kolek has, at least not for me. He could. But it just makes so much sense. Like, I think that's the name. There are some other ones I kind of like, but if I have to bet 100 Kris bucks, how much is a drink in New York? Like, I mean, that's a pretty good conversion rate. I feel like in New York, that's like 20, 25 bucks for a drink. I'm terrified of New York City, by the way, just so you know.
15.
I'm terrified I've been to the city a few times because I went to school in DC and had some friends, but I'm terrified of New York City. That place is way too big for me. So I will not be cashing that in unless we can convert it to like Las Vegas at Summer League or something.
Okay, sounds good. Well, listen, Kolek is someone who I think would endear himself to Knicks fans quickly. This is a fan base who, like, a guy's on an island and OG Anunoby's guarding him 35 feet out, they get loud. Yeah. Mitch Robinson dives on the floor after a blocked shot for a loose ball and a rebound. They'll cheer louder than they did for the block. Like, as much as I like to laugh at some Knicks fans, like, mock trades and whatever, like, this is a high B-ball IQ fan base who loves grittiness, who loves toughness. And Kolek would really quickly become a fan favorite, in my opinion, the same way that A10 made TJ McConnell. I went to Fordham, so random A10 agenda, but TJ McConnell became an Indiana fan favorite and someone who, like, sneakily made the team look better in a lot of games than when Halliburton was on the court. Like, that was crazy. So yeah.
Real quick, what I don't want to get lost in this, because I agree with everything he said, Kolek is very skilled. And so, like, he has shot the ball really well the last couple of years. He can operate ball screens. He can, I think he can get into the paint. Whether he's going to be able to score with his size, I don't know. But Kolek is a skilled offensive basketball player, along with all these other intangibles you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember, being at the Shaka presser at the Big East tournament, and he was like, we're doing this without who a lot of the guys in that locker room would tell you is the best player in the Big East, like the best point guard in the Big East. And so as a result, those are, like, I don't know, the Knicks are never the team that's going to go after the flashy, like, Ivy was such an outlier to me, their Ivy interest.
That one never made sense to me. Like, obviously I was very invested in draft night. It was exactly. It was crazy to keep track of all of it. Never made sense to me. Because listen, like, Jaden has been as bad defensively through his first couple of years as what the scouting reports were also. And so I'm surprised that they were so intrigued by him, because the defense was a concern coming into the league, and it's proven to be. Now, he got better this year on the margins in some spots, but it's still not great by any. It's not even league average yet. It's still bad. And so that fit was always interesting. It was interesting.
For sure. But Kolek, Tom Thibodeau, I think would maybe just love nothing more than to spend a night with some frozen pizzas and Diet Cokes watching Kolek film. So with that said, I do think that it would be a really great fit. And I do think that he's someone who, maybe wouldn't enter the season in the rotation, but might end up playing playoff minutes depending on if someone gets hurt. And, like, that's crazy. With all that said, Bryce, I guess now my actual final question. Anything you want to plug to our listeners before I get you on your way?
Sure. Yeah. So at Motor City Hoops on Twitter, if you're not, would love to follow. That's where you can find all of my work. I honestly don't tweet a ton anymore other than the content, podcast, stuff like that. So you're not going to get your timeline just pushed a bunch of Pistons content. I talk NBA on there, NBA draft, the Pistons podcast. If you guys want Pistons specific content, that you can come listen to the Pistons Pulse, but Game Theory with Sam Vecenie, you guys definitely should check that out. Bunch of NBA draft stuff. And then 2 Substacks real quick. My Motor City Hoops one, but the basketball bulletin I do with Trevor Lane and Keith Smith. I have like 35 or so scouts already dropped on there, and it's my raw notes scouts. And so I'm pretty proud of those. I put a lot of work into them. So check those out, but really just follow me on Twitter. You can find everything else. And I appreciate you having me, Kris. I love what you guys do over here. Always excited when you guys reach out. Like I said, Andrew's my guy. And so I had a blast, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. And to our listeners, thank you so much for coming back for, again, what I cannot believe is a 3rd year of Knicks Film School's draft class. Pun intended, as always. I absolutely love everyone who listened to this. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.